Mr. President, everybody knows that our country has an $850 billion deficit and a $16+ trillion national debt. But what has not been discussed as often as it should is how we came into that financial position. How do we have the deficit and how do we have this huge debt? Let us not forget, as we discuss this issue, that in January of 2001, when President Bill Clinton left office, this country had an annual federal budget surplus of $236 billion. Surplus of $236 billion in January 2001. We now have an $850 billion deficit. What happened? Well, I think many Americans know what happened. When you go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq and you don't pay for those wars, you add to the deficit. When you give huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country and you don't offset that, you add to the deficit. When you pass a Medicare Part D prescription drug program, you don't pay for that, you add to the deficit. And on top of all of that, we must understand that right now, at 15.8% of GDP, revenue coming into the federal government is the lowest that it has been in 60 years. And the reason for that is that we are in the midst of a very serious recession, a recession caused by the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior on Wall Street. And not only has that led to significant increases in unemployment and businesses going under, once again, it resulted in less tax revenue coming in to this government. And by the way, Mr. President, when we talk about Wall Street and the greed and the recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street, I must say that I was really stunned when the Attorney General of the United States recently suggested that it might be difficult to prosecute Wall Street CEOs who commit crimes because of the destabilizing effect that prosecution might have on the financial system of our country and the world. In other words, we have a situation now where Wall Street is not only too big to fail, they are too big to jail. And the theory is that if you're just a regular person, you commit a crime, you go to jail. You're head of a Wall Street company. Your power is so great, the tentacles of that company are so great, that if you are prosecuted and there's destabilization in that company, it can have worldwide or national implications. Mr. President, that is an issue we have got to think long and hard about. We are supposed to be a country of law, and that law should apply to the CEOs of Wall Street companies as well as everybody else. Mr. President, the other point I want to make deals, if you want, with a moral issue. When you're dealing with deficit reduction, I've just described how we got into the deficit situation. But when you're dealing with the deficit situation and you say we need to make sacrifices, it is absolutely appropriate and ask who is best able to make those sacrifices. And right now, as I think most Americans know, the wealthiest people in this country are doing phenomenally well. Large corporations are enjoying record-breaking profits. That's one group of people. Meanwhile, the middle class of this country is disappearing, and we have 46 million people living in poverty. So common morality, basic morality says, who do you ask most significantly to help us with deficit reduction? Do you tell an unemployed worker who is struggling to keep his or her family afloat that we're going to balance the budget on your back? Or do you say maybe to a huge profitable corporation that in some cases is paying nothing in taxes that, you know what, we're going to ask you to help us with deficit reduction? Now, Mr. President, it is important for us to do what we do too rarely on the floor of the Senate, take a hard look at what's happening to the American people right now. I am very pleased we're seeing more job creation. Good thing. We're seeing somewhat of a recovery in housing. Very good thing. But let us understand where the middle class of this country is today, where the working class of this country is today, before we demand that we balance the budget on their backs as the Ryan budget in the House does. Mr. President, since 1999, the average middle-class family has seen its income go down by nearly $5,000 after adjusting for inflation. Median family income today is lower than it was in 1996. Real unemployment is not 7.7%. It is 14.3% if you count those people who have given up looking for work and are working part-time. Youth unemployment is even higher. More than 25% of young Americans are unemployed. In terms of the African American community, unemployment is off the charts. Mr. President, when we talk about job creation, we all want job creation. It is important, however, to understand that nearly 60% of the new jobs that have been created since 2010 are low-wage jobs, paying between $7.80 an hour and $13.80 an hour. Jobs, yes, but we want jobs that families can take care of their families on, not just low-wage jobs. Further, Mr. President, when we are talking about the budget, and we don't talk about this at all, I know that my Republican friends don't talk about it, most of my Democratic friends don't talk about it. It's anathema here to talk about issues of distribution of wealth and income, but I think it is important before we talk about on whose backs we're going to balance the budget. Today, the United States has the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and the gap between the very, very wealthy and everyone else is growing wider and wider. Incredibly, the wealthiest 400 individuals in this country today own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million people. Now, Mr. President, I think that's an issue we might want to discuss, even if it offends some of our wealthy campaign contributors. But I think we should put that on the table. Today, one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of families in this country. And by the way, you'll all be delighted to know they got a huge tax break recently. Today, the top 1% owns 38% of all financial wealth. That is a stunning number. What is even more stunning is the bottom 60% own 2.3% of the wealth in this nation. 1% on top owns 38% of the wealth. Bottom 60% owns 2.3%. And who does Mr. Ryan and my Republican friends want to balance the budget on? Those 60%, the working families who already have nothing, who are losing what they have, who are struggling to keep their heads above water. But it's not just distribution of wealth, it's distribution of income. If you can believe it, this is just, again, a stunning fact, which for some reason we don't talk about too much here on the floor. A recent study showed that all of the new income gained from 2009 to 2011 went to the top 1%. 99% gained nothing. So who do we balance the budget on? Well, of course, you go after the middle class, go after the working class, go after low-income people. Well, maybe, somebody might want to ask that 1% to start paying a little bit more in taxes before we cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, and nutrition. Mr. President, one of the good parts of the Murray budget is that it provides $100 billion in funding to put millions of Americans back to work, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. I would have gone much higher, because while deficit reduction is a very serious issue, it is even more important that we start putting millions of people back to work who are in desperate need of employment. Fastest way to do that is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. $100 billion is a good start. We need more. Now, Mr. President, during the consideration of the budget resolution, I plan on offering two amendments. The first amendment, number 264, would create a reserve fund to reduce the deficit and create jobs by eliminating offshore tax abuse by large profitable corporations. The second amendment, amendment number 198, would establish a deficit-neutral reserve fund to protect the benefits of disabled veterans, and I speak as chairman of the Veterans Committee, disabled vets and their survivors, by not enacting the so-called chain CPI, and I'm pleased that this amendment is being co-sponsored by Senator Harkin and Senator Hirono. And let me take a few minutes to describe both of these amendments. Mr. President, at a time when corporate profits are at an all-time high, when the effective corporate tax rate is at a 40-year low, when 1 out of 4 profitable corporations pay 0 in taxes, it is time for large profitable corporations to significantly contribute to deficit reduction. Now, the first amendment that I'll be offering would create a reserve fund to reduce the deficit and create jobs by eliminating offshore tax abuse by large profitable corporations. Mr. President, in 2011, corporate revenue as a percentage of GDP was just 1.2%. That is lower than any other major country in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Lower than Britain, Germany, France, Japan, Canada, you name it. Each and every year, corporations and the wealthy are avoiding more than $100 billion in U.S. taxes by sheltering their income offshore. Offshore tax schemes have become so absurd that one 5-story building in the Cayman Islands is now the quote-unquote home to more than 18,000 corporations. Mr. President, when the Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Citigroup needed a taxpayer bailout in 2008, and I did not vote for that bailout, they told us what great Americans they were, how much they loved the United States of America, proud to be an American. But when it comes to paying their taxes, these large Wall Street companies are proud to be with the Cayman Islands. So my suggestion to these corporations, next time you need a bailout, don't come to the taxpayers of America, go to the people of the Cayman Islands and get your bailout there. But so long as you're an American company, how about helping us with deficit reduction and paying some taxes in this country? But it's not just Wall Street. You got pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer also using offshore tax havens. Apple wants all the advantages of being an American company, but it doesn't want to pay American taxes or American wages. It creates the iPad, the iPhone, the iPod, iTunes in the United States, manufactures most of its products in China, and then it ships most of its profits to Ireland, Luxembourg, the British Virgin Islands, and other tax havens to avoid paying U.S. taxes. Mr. President, this is a huge issue. By the way, it's not just an American issue. It is an issue facing governments all over the world. Corporations run to tax havens, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and elsewhere. We have got to address that issue. Mr. President, I'm going to list for the record, submit to the record, 15 large profitable corporations that have used offshore tax havens to avoid paying U.S. income taxes in recent years. Top of the list, I'm going to give you just one example. Bank of America. 2010, Bank of America set up more than 200 subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands to avoid paying U.S. taxes. It worked. Not only did Bank of America pay nothing in federal income taxes, but it received a rebate from the IRS for $1.9 billion that year. Now, before you cut Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, do you think maybe we might want to ask Bank of America, who we bailed out, by the way, to help us with deficit reduction? General Electric, during the last 5 years, General Electric made $81 billion in profits. Not only has General Electric avoided paying federal income taxes during these years, it received a tax rebate of $3 billion from the IRS. GE has at least 14 offshore subsidiaries in Bermuda, Singapore, and Luxembourg. Citigroup, Verizon, Honeywell International, J.P. Morgan Chase, Merrick, Corning, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Caterpillar, Cisco Systems, Dow Chemicals, major profitable corporations using tax havens to avoid paying in the United States of America. We have an amendment to deal with that issue, and I hope we can have bipartisan support for that amendment.